I remember in 2003, I was skating in a practice, and we do these things called, well, there's some speed skaters here, but we do these things called excels, and you basically hit top speed when you're going around the corner. And somehow I lost my balance, I fell, I crashed into another skater that was gliding around the edge, and her blade cut the inside of my forearm. I ended up cutting 12 tendons, a nerve, and an artery. And this was about a week before we were leaving for the World Cups. And so I was devastated because I was ready to go race overseas for our country. And I was stuck in the hospital. They told me that my season was over, and that was tough. But I really was able to just press into God and trust Him. I got some time with my family that I normally wouldn't, but just being able to spend time in the Word and just lean on God during that time. And He pulled me through, and I was able to get back onto my skates by the end of the season, make it to the World Championships, and even be able to step onto the podium there. And so it ended up being kind of, it was tough, but it was also a blessing to be able to strengthen my faith during that time. At the Olympics in 2006, going into the 1,500 meter race, I was paired with the reigning gold medalist from the last Olympics, and she was fierce, like a great competitor from Germany. And I feel like normally I would be nervous, but I just gave it to God. I trusted Him, and I was excited to go race. And one verse that kept coming to my mind was Psalm 16:8, and it talks about how I have placed the Lord before me. Because He is at my right hand, I will not be shaken. And there's also an artist from Winnipeg. His name is Steve Bell, and he put that to music. And I was listening to that before my race, and I just felt like I'm going out into this race. I'm excited. I'm a little bit nervous too. I'm racing against this champion from Germany, but I can trust God in this and go out, race to the best of my ability for His glory. And I ended up coming out on top in that race, and it was probably the race of my life. And so it's been awesome just being able to trust God in all circumstances, and He's always been there for me. Well, I believe that He gave me the talent to skate, and so by going out and doing the best that I can, I feel like that's honoring Him and skating for His glory. And there's a verse in the Bible that talks about whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. And so it's actually, no matter what I'm doing, it doesn't have to be in sports. Now I'm in school, and so I think about this when I'm in school too, but whatever I'm doing, I just do it to the best of my ability for Him, because I feel like He's given me this gift to be able to play sports or to go to school or whatever my line of work might be after this. I just want to do it all for Him. And so with that mindset, I just felt like every practice, every stride that I took, every race, I gave it 100%. When I started speed skating, I had to give up a lot, that's for sure. Just making sacrifices in terms of maybe not hanging out with my friends as much as I'd like, because I have an early morning practice, and so staying up late, that just wasn't an option if I wanted to do the best that I could. And also, I moved away from home when I was about 20 years old, and I moved to Calgary. And it was hard being away from my family because we're really tight. And so it was tough being in a city where I didn't really know anybody. I kind of put my life on hold, like with the schooling and stuff like that. As an amateur athlete, you get carding from the government, which is awesome. It helps a lot. So you get some funding, but basically you're kind of on your own, trying to find sponsors and to be able to live and eat and to have an apartment or something like that while you're training. It can be tough, but I loved it. I loved every moment of it, and being able to represent our country is such an honor, and especially in Vancouver, being able to race on home soil was very, very special. And so I just want to say thank you to all of you as well for the support, because we definitely felt it in Vancouver and at any Olympics. So that's great.
I think one of the unfortunate things that happens and that I've seen a number of different times working with athletes and actually with a number of Christian organizations. I went to a Christian high school, and you'll see it in a lot of the American Christian schools too. There's a verse that's used out of context quite often, and it's from Philippians 4, verse 13. It says, "I can do all things through him who strengthens me." And it's a great verse, but it's often used as this like little guy beats the big guy. We're coming back after some kind of setback, and we're going to come here and we're going to do it. We're going to win this. And really the context of the verse is Paul's talking about his experience of really experiencing the worst of times and the best of times, but he's talking about learning to be content in all circumstances. And this verse really, I think, has so much more to do with, I can face whatever God gives me, and it might be playing through injury, it might be dealing with setbacks that we never come back from, and it might be dealing, there's a lot of different things that it means as far as, what I can do, but I can be content, as a starter. I can be content and I can be okay with having to deal with this and face this uncertainty of maybe I'm not going to be on this team any longer. And I think success in our world sometimes gets taken out of context. And as a Christian, really beginning to understand as I continue to work with particularly varsity university athletes is just putting a lot of eggs in one basket, hoping that their university career is going to be this amazing experience. And often what I find is by the time they get to their fifth years, a lot of them are feeling like this is not everything I hoped it would be. I'm maybe not the starter. Maybe our team is not as successful as it's been. And there's a lot of letdown and discouragement. So I think just to judge success on personal bests and winning, those kinds of things are really detrimental in the long run to our mental and emotional and spiritual health.
Brad, maybe just add to that, listening to you talk, it brought back a memory for me of my grandmother. And so when I think about faith in sports, she oftentimes comes to mind, and maybe not always for the best reasons. She was very well-intentioned. She was a very religious and faithful person. But when she came to watch me play hockey, some of that would get kind of carried away. She would get very emotional. And when it would come time to a tough part in the game or a tense moment, she would start praying. And she would pray for Brad to shoot a goal, or for the other team to make a mistake, or to break a stick, or to get a penalty. And so we oftentimes chuckled about that because it was kind of cute. She meant it well. It was a little bit maybe misdirected. But as I look back on that and think about kind of my own approach, I was, and I liked your idea, and I had never thought of this way, of contentment. And I could always find satisfaction as an athlete and contentment if after a game, win or lose, I felt I did my best. I allowed my training and both physically, mentally, spiritually to come through, and I gave it my all. And I could really say that a lot of times after some very difficult losses, when I felt that I gave everything I had, I felt fine, I felt proud. And the other thing to keep in mind is when I think back on some of the big wins versus the big losses, probably learned more from the big losses than the big wins. That's when you really had to take a step back and assess yourself, assess the team, and look at things and where the lessons were learned. I think as Christians, we should be less bashful about our faith, and that includes in the sports setting. I think back sometimes when I maybe wasn't as vocal as I should have been as a young person, and even as an adult in certain situations I was faced with. I think back just a couple years ago at a event I was involved in for physically challenged athletes, a hockey tournament in Kitchener. I was one of the honorary captains for one of the teams, and they started the tournament. There was teams from all over North America and in fact Europe as well, and it was a great event. They started the tournament, had a beautiful opening ceremonies. They started the tournament with a prayer. And they had a Catholic bishop there, and he said a very nice prayer. And I thought, of course, how fitting. I thought it was great. And I actually asked some other people around just what they thought of that. And people were so delighted that they took that step to have a prayer. Not everybody was necessarily a Christian in that environment, but they felt it was so appropriate. And so I think sometimes we're we have to take the light shade off the lamp a little bit and let our light shine.
Actually started off in hockey at a young age. I think I was 4 years old, and when I was at that age, there was no girls playing hockey at that time, so I was playing with the guys. And early on, my dad found out that women's hockey was going to be in the Olympics for the first time in 1998. So I had my eyes set on that. Growing up, I made the top teams in guys hockey until I was about 15. After 15, the guys were too big with the body checking and stuff, and so I had to switch to women's hockey. But everything seemed to be going as planned. And then in 1997, I got a call to come out to Calgary and try out for the women's national team. And I thought, well, this is it. And I went to the tryouts. I thought they had gone well. And about a week after returning home to Winnipeg, I got a call saying I was cut. And I was devastated. And I had to ask God why. And I needed another sport to play. And my parents suggested speed skating. And when they first suggested it, I said no way, because there's no way I was going to put on one of those tight skin suits. And the long blades looked funny to me, and I thought my friends in hockey would make fun of me. But for some reason, they kept encouraging me, and so I went out to a practice. There I was, 18 years old, getting passed left and right by 5-year-old kids, half my height. And so it was it was a very humbling experience. But I kept going back, and it must have been God just drawing me back to the ice rink. That first season, watching the 98 games on TV and just being glued to my television set every time speed skating was on. And I watched Katrina LeMay-Doan, another Christian. She won gold at those games. Suzanne from Winnipeg, she won silver. And I was so inspired. And I felt like God just planted that dream in my heart again to qualify for the Olympics, but in an entirely different sport.
I think, though, what I love about sport is that I really feel like it's a microcosm of like things that you can learn every season, and it becomes things that can transfer into the rest of your life. So every season I played, I had an opportunity to deal with injury, to deal with authority with my coaches, to deal with communication and conflict with teammates, dealing with winning, dealing with losing, dealing with disappointment. And thankfully, I had really great coaches most of the time, and they were able to, speak a lot of stuff through that and help me to grow my character. When you're an athlete, you get a chance every season to start over new again. And how am I going to deal differently with these injuries? How am I going to deal differently with these disappointments? And really, all of this is going to transfer into your life later. I was just on Wednesday night having a great conversation with our Athletes in Action at the University Waterloo meeting, and a football player, actually. We were talking about what are some of the issues that you're dealing with right now in your sport. What have you faced? And he summed it up really great. He said, he's like, there's a lack of love. And he's like, if you look at 1 Corinthians 13 and the definitions of love, really sport just shows the opposite. So when it says love is patient, love is kind, really, when you think about the coaches that sometimes these athletes are dealing with, they're not patient. When you are not performing your job and your starting position is on the line, yelling and screaming is a part of sport, often, especially at the university level. Love does not envy, it does not boast, it's not proud. And I think, man, as a red shirt, you're always wanting to be, you just want to travel, you want to dress. Once you're you're a sub, you just want to be a starter. And once you're a starter, you want to be the go-to person and want the green light for scoring. And once you're that, the go-to person, you want a better team to play with so that you can win a championship. And so there's always opportunity to be envious of the next person, not being proud or boasting. I loved having my name in the newspaper growing up and having how many points I scored. And then getting into the next levels, finding it harder and harder to have that happen. We're self-seeking, we're prideful, and it can really, it shows itself, and there's a scoreboard all the time going on. So those kinds of things, I think, sport can really epitomize a lot of the bad things, and it draws things out and it reveals it for everybody to see on the spot. So there's a scoreboard to see, there's stats being taken, so love keeps no record of wrongs. So your coach has your record of wrongs and what your free throw percentages are. And
I remember a similar situation in 1992, my first Olympic Games game in France, actually against the host country. And I remember in the dressing room before the game, I could hardly hold my stick. I was shaking so badly, and I usually wasn't a player that got that nervous. And it was so bad that Eric Lindros was on the team, and he was, I think, 17 years old. And he said, "Old man, you got to settle down." I was 22. But it made me think at that time about Kelly Rudy, and he's you may know him from CBC TV, and he's a Christian. And I remember watching an interview of his when he was playing before a big playoff game. He was playing goal for the LA Kings, and the reporter, of course, was trying to communicate, the atmosphere and how much pressure and playing all that up. And Rudy was so cool, and he said, "You know what? No matter what happens out on that ice today, I know my family's going to love me." And I think we can extend that to no matter what happens on the field today or in the ice rink today, God is going to love me. So that really kind of takes a lot of the pressure off. It shouldn't be a cop-out. It shouldn't be to say, listen, I'm not going to try my best, or I'm not going to train my hardest, or not going to listen to my coaches. But it takes it out of a life and death situation, which it shouldn't be.
Well, I have to be very thankful for my family. I mean, that's kind of they keep me grounded, and I feel very blessed to have grown up in a home where Christ was at the center. When I qualified for the national team and we started traveling quite a bit, I found it difficult because all of a sudden I'm not in my home church every weekend, and I'm not around my friends who can hold me accountable, or I have that support system. And so, I learned early on that how important it is to take that time each day I like to start my day with spending time with God and in the Word and in praying. And I feel like I need that. I need that to get me through my day, and knowing that God is with me, and just to spend that time with him is very special for me. And also, it was neat because there were some places where we would go to and they'd have like an Athletes in Action kind of set up, and so we could have Bible studies on the road every so often. And so just connecting with those other believers on the road really helped to know that I wasn't the only one out there, that I had support too through other skaters. But then when I came back to Calgary, just making sure that I was staying connected with the church as much as I could, and with like a small group, a Bible study group, and also with my friends who are believers. But I think the most important thing was just, and today too, is just starting my day with God and reading his word daily, and just gaining strength through that.
And I think a lot of times we can be examples, and it's not always shouting from the mountaintop. And that's a longer process sometimes, and this transcends sports, of course. But I think of my junior days with the London Knights. I got to be careful in Kitchener saying that. But as a young player going through that whole hazing experience, and of course that's something that's being talked a lot about now, and really a lot of distasteful things happened. I don't even want to get into them. And it was such an entrenched part of the sport and of the tradition in junior hockey. And 2 years later, I was captain of the team. And I remember back when I was a rookie, and I said, that's just not going to happen again, that kind of thing. And I talked to some of the older players in the team, and I said, I'm not against, some initiation. That's part of kind of, the young kids being accepted into a team. But we're not going to do it the way we've always done it. And I thought there was going to be a real backlash against that stance that I took. And there wasn't a big response at first, but I had a lot of the players come up to me before initiation and thanking me for that. They said, "Thank you for doing that. I felt uncomfortable about it, but didn't want to say anything." And so it's a lot of times, not shouting from the mountaintop, but, leading by example. And people a lot of times in the long run are attracted to what we represent as Christians.
I think that the most important thing is making sure that Christ is at the center. And there's things that I went through that I think that maybe we could have done differently. Like when I was growing up, when I was playing hockey, playing on the guys' teams, what came up one year was practices Sunday morning, and my parents said, if it ever interferes with church, then you're not going to play on that team. And so it turned out that like they talked to the coach about it, and there's another guy on the team that was in a similar situation, and the coaches were okay with me coming late to the practice, and so it meant that I could go to church, but I couldn't go to Sunday school. And looking back now, I feel like I missed out on a lot because of that, because all of my friends were in Sunday school, so I lost that connection, and which is really unfortunate. And I think that maybe, like looking back now, I know sometimes that's the way it goes. Sometimes there's practices or games on Sundays and it interferes with church, but maybe there would have been other ways that my parents could have got me involved with the kids my age, because I felt like I kind of lost that connection and lost that support. And so I think that's really important, just to make sure that that in life that Christ is at the center, and sometimes you have to make sacrifices with things you're doing, but just making sure that you're immersed with people that will hold you accountable, that will strengthen your faith, and will support you. And I think that being in a community like that is really important, because we can't live our life and live our faith on our own.
And I think I struggled a lot with trying to prove my worth and finding so much identity in how I performed, versus understanding that really in sport it has everything to do with, releasing that I have to prove myself, that I need to try harder. In fact, Jesus really spoke against the Pharisees for trying hard and to do all the things right and to look a certain way and to prove that they were good enough. And I think the tension with athletes is to not get sucked, although we have to do that in sport and we have to earn things, and we can be not good enough in sport. That's just something that is a reality in our Christian walk and in our faith. When we stumble, when we sin, when we make, we go through trials, the biggest lie that I've had to deal with is that you're not good enough. Even with all of the success, I'm sure that both of these people can say that same thing. It seems to be a thing that's very common amongst athletes, to just always feel like they've got to prove it. And when we don't feel good enough, I think what we need to do is red flag that lie from the enemy and being able to claim promises from God's word about who I am in Christ and what he has to say about who I am. And it's not about me pulling up my socks and reading the Bible more and doing this and doing this. It really comes down to a really simple prayer and opening my hand and saying, Lord, I need you to live through me. I need you to live your life through me. And however that's going to look, in good and in bad, that's what I want you to do. And for me, that released all the tension of trying to, day in and day out, be at a certain level and compete and do those kinds of things. So I think that's one of the biggest things I can tell you guys is to, when you go and watch your kids, for instance, one of the best things you can say to them is, I love watching you play. If I could just say those 5 words to my children, and I felt that from my parents growing up when I played sports, I love watching you play. That's so reaffirming. It has nothing to do with, when you say to a child, you're so good, you're so smart, instantly it creates pressure to live up to something all the time now. But being able to watch someone play for the love of the game allows them to be instilled with, there's unconditional love involved. And that's really, I think, when Christ looks down at us and the Bible speaks about him looking at us with love, that's such an important lesson for us in sports to really try to live out.
Just a couple quick stories, picking up on a couple things that you guys said, and I'm actually finding it quite fascinating listening to you talk. I'm learning a lot. I'm hoping you guys are as well. It makes me think of a story about my parents, and Cindy, you mentioned about your parents growing up, and even back in the 70s and 80s, it's probably not quite as pressurized as it is now, but it was still in the hockey scene. A lot of pressure on young kids, especially at the top levels, and a lot of competition amongst players and parents and coaches and all that stuff. And my parents, and it was tough, and I didn't like them for it actually at the time, to be honest with you. But looking back, it was a great gift. They laid the ground rules out every year with the coach. So before the tryouts were over, I can't remember, actually, it may have been before the tryouts, he would ask for a meeting with the coach. And this was for the AAA team in Kitchener, and introduce himself. Jamie and I, my twin brother, would have to go along, sheepishly. And he would say that we're a Christian family, and that Sunday mornings is off limits. If there's Sunday practice, Sunday games, we're not going to be there. And he wants to let them know up front. If they have an issue with that and they don't want us on the team, that's their decision, and we'll respect that. And oh boy, I hated those discussions. Not once did a coach prevent us from being on the team for that. I think it was also because he was losing 2 players instead of just 1. And so that was, it was tough early on, but as I got older and the pressure kind of mounted, Dad stuck by his guns, and we had those discussions every time. And it wasn't until my draft year when I was 15, turning 16, that he loosened that up a little bit. And so I would miss Sunday school, but still get to church. So it was tough, but I think people respected that. The other thing I'm going to say just real quickly, because I know we want to get to some questions, is, and it's maybe not a Christian thing, but it is, and that is that sports should be about joy. And Christianity is also about joy and good news. After the Olympics, I had a chance to talk to a lot of young players and teams and banquets and all that kind of stuff. And I never forget one time, it was an evaluation camp for an under-16 Canadian team here in Waterloo. And I brought the message of having fun, enjoying the sport. And I talked a bit about that. And I said, it's not about not listening to your coaches. It's not about training hard and focusing and doing your best. It's not about that, or it's not about neglecting that. You can still do that, but you just also find the joy in the sport and in your teammates. And that wasn't well received by a lot of parents. And it wasn't well received by the coaches that were there. I saw a lot of people shaking their heads. I had some people come up to me afterwards and say they didn't appreciate that. In fact, after I gave up the mic, the coach came on, and he was talking to the players, but he was really talking to me. And he said, if you guys think this is a vacation, you guys got another thing coming, you're going to work harder than you ever worked before, you're going to be dragging your tongue on the ice and skating over it, we're going to be screaming at you. It was like a drill sergeant. I was scared with the guy talking. And so there's a lot of times that doesn't want to be heard, that message, but I think it's an important one.
Sometimes I find it really hard when people say, God's got to be number one in your life. I don't understand what that looks like. I always think of a pie, and I think of okay, the hours that I spend doing school and the hours I need to train, I'm not going to be able to read the Bible longer than I do those things or pray. So what does that mean? And the best illustration that was ever given to me was of a lunch tray or of a child's tray that's divided into sections. And I remember them saying, so if you've got sport, you've got your school, you've got your home life, you've got your extracurricular activities, where does God fit into that? Do I make him the biggest section somehow? What does that look like? And I just remember them saying, the goal is to make God the tray, and that you put everything into that. So God is a part of all of those things. And that's just really released me from feeling stressed about juggling everything and going my job is to bring God into everything, and Lord, help renew my mind in this place that I find myself in. And that's how I find that balance in my life, and being able to keep him really number one in my life. He is a part of all of my life. So thanks.